Hello and welcome to another episode of Change One Thing, the show where we explore if tomorrow will really be what tomorrow will be. Hello, it's Lani Salathiel. Thanks for joining us again. Today our guest is Mr. Damien Manuel, who is a Director of the Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation, Strategic Research Centre at Deakin University. Damien has more than 25 years' experience in cybersecurity, business governance, compliance and risk management. He has worked in senior security roles for a range of organisations including Symantec, National Australia Bank and Telstra. He's a regular in the media and you may have already heard his expert commentary on a range of cybersecurity issues. Damien's passion for making a difference led him to establish IT community resource centres to improve literacy skills in disadvantaged communities across the globe. Damien had my brain exploding on several occasions, sharing his insights into the cyber world we all inhabit. You're really going to want to listen to this one as it's full of practical tips and info we can all use. Here we go, Change One Thing with Mr. Damien Manuel. Well, welcome, Damien. You have quite the resume and you seem like a very, very handy guy to have around when things go wrong digitally. How did you originally get into this field of study?
So many years ago, when the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 came out, I got involved using one of those and just through your school network then got into a hackers collective. And I used to exchange all kinds of things from a electronic perspective with people all around the world. Used to spend all my pocket money on shipping parcels every week to places like the UK, the US, Iran, just globally all around the world as an 11-year-old.
Unbelievable. And I was joking pre-show about whether, you can be hired as a hacker, and you turned around and replied with, well, I was a hacker at 11 years old.
Yep, correct. Before the days of the internet.
Yeah, wow. That is just, you were way ahead of the game, and pre-internet, that's almost, you just can't imagine it now. So Damien, how has the idea of a hacker changed from when you were a young tacker hacking into things you may or shouldn't perhaps have been hacking into to what hackers are doing now?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So I guess in the early days you can think of it as one group of hackers, you could say or classify them as creative exploiters. And they were people like me who were interested in finding out how a system works and the flaws in that system and how it can be broken to sort of pull it apart and understand it. And that motivation is really around curiosity. It's not a malicious sort of act. Then, you started to see the rise of what they called the script kiddies. And they gave it quite a horrible name, script kiddie, because those individuals were people who would get access to tools that were developed by criminal syndicates or by government agencies. They'd, obviously stumble across those tools online or in some cases buy those tools. And they really don't know how to do programming or how to hack, but they just know how to sort of point and click on different tools. And so they gave them the bit of a derogatory term of script kiddies. And they try to do it mainly for fame, like vandalising websites and things like that. Then you had the hacktivists. So hacktivists are politically motivated. They're a loose collective. Probably the most famous one is the group Anonymous, who would hack sort of different governments and different agencies. Then the other thing to look at you've got is the trusted insider. And the trusted insider is one that I would break into three different categories. You've got somebody who accidentally exposes information or leaks information, and I'd say they're more negligent. Then you've got those that are have an ethical dilemma that they're trying to deal with. So a classic example is Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning and Mark Felt, who was also known as Deep Throat in the whole Watergate sort of scandal. And they were individuals who saw something, had some information that didn't gel with their ethics and thought it was in the public interest to expose that information. And then you've got the other type of trusted insider, which is the individual who does things out of greed. They've either got a gambling problem, a drug addiction, or they felt like they should have received a promotion or a pay increase and they didn't. So they've been quite malicious, if you like. The other category you've also got is cybercrime syndicates. They'll do things for financial reasons and for power. They're obviously power hungry and after money. And then the other area to look at is governments. And governments, you can look at it from an internal perspective, where governments want to control their own populations, or you've got governments attacking other countries sort of externally, and that's to steal IP, exert a little bit of muscle sort of in the diplomacy space as well. There is another emerging area, which is terrorism. So cyber terrorism, the terrorists could quite easily get access to a lot of tools and services, and they could buy those from crime syndicates as well, because they often sell their service. So what we'll see more and more in the future is terrorist organisations getting access to tools and services that can be quite devastating to a number of countries and individuals as well.
So in terms of terrorism, I guess like affecting people personally or the government as such, and almost like a bit of a ransom, or just doing it to inflict sort of terror on that country?
Yeah, so say, for example, if a terrorist organisation got access to the tools and technology, they would be able to shut down, for example, water systems, and you'd say, how important is that? Well, actually, water systems has a flow-on effect to a lot of transportation systems. So you wouldn't be able to use tunnels because they use water for purifying the air and for humidifying the air. A lot of technology systems rely on the right humidity levels in server rooms, so the impact would be quite widespread. There is another element where some of these organisations like terrorists and hacktivists can also do what's called doxing. So doxing is where I might look at you as an individual who might be quite an important individual, either as a political figure or an executive in a company. I will find out whatever information I can find out about you that might be unsavoury, and I will blackmail you to say that I will expose that information if you don't pay a ransom and things like that as well. And that could be things like, your medical records that you wanted to keep private. It could be, maybe you've had an affair or something like that, and so they expose that kind of information and use it as leverage. So that's quite another common area that you'll start to see from hacktivists and sort of cyber criminals as well as terrorists as well.
There is really so many elements to the word hacker now, and I guess it's only going to expand as the technology grows and expands as well.
Correct, yeah. And you'll find that it'll morph into something else that maybe in 10 years from now there'll be a whole new category we hadn't even thought of.
Let's talk a little bit about your research into cybersecurity. Can you explain just in general terms what is cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity is a field that looks at protecting information and data. And with the digital age that we're in at the moment, everything's obviously connected. All of our records tend to be digital records these days. So cybersecurity is around how you protect that information and data. And we're starting to see the field also morph and change, where cybersecurity is not just about data anymore, but it's also starting to move to things like people, businesses, how to keep businesses functioning and running and resilient as well to attacks.
So there's a personal element to this, obviously, because
Yes.
we all have digital devices now, and there's a corporate element and a business element, and then there's also an international element as well. There is so many aspects to this, and I guess with cyber threats are obviously constantly changing because the technology itself is changing so rapidly as well.
Yes, correct. It's changing almost on a daily basis. Even in some cases, minute to minute, things can be advancing and changing. Somebody could develop a new way of attacking a system and sell that information on the dark web, and that can spread quite rapidly. And sort of within hours, you may see malicious software developed and deployed across the globe. So it's a fast-moving environment.
Now, Damien, are we seeing things like quantum programs that are intelligent and are thinking for themselves and sort of changing as they sort of go and evolving? Are you seeing things like that now?
We know that that's coming, but the most common one is more people offering a service. So the hackers are offering a service to criminal syndicates or to governments as well. And what they'll do is they'll provide a service where you can buy some malware from them. They'll make sure that the existing security tools like antivirus and anti-malware won't detect it. And then as soon as it does detect it, they'll modify that in some way quite easily so it's undetectable again for a period of time. And that's a service that they'll offer on the dark web that different organisations or individuals can procure from them as well. But what we are worried about is with automation and artificial intelligence sort of systems being built, there will be a time when malware will be able to morph and change by itself. And that's going to be quite interesting and scary at the same time.
My mind's just going to the Transformers movie. I don't know if you've seen that. But now, speaking of the dark web, that's so interesting. What is it? How do you get on there? Like, if I wanted to just get on the dark web, whatever this mysterious thing is, how do I get on there?
Yep, okay. So the dark web is, think of it this way. You can access the internet and you know where to go because you're using search engines like Google or Bing or one of the others. And effectively, they will index or search the web, and they'll actually provide an IP address to a name. So if you're looking, for example, like deakin.edu.au, you type that in and it converts that into an IP address that goes to the server, and that's the Deakin's website. With the dark web, there's a whole space out there where if you don't know how to index it, it remains hidden. So they often refer to that as the dark web. There are special software that sometimes you need to install. It might be a special code that you might need to use to access a particular site. It could even be it doesn't have a name that you would recognize as a human, but it might just be an IP address that you need to go to and enter some special details, and then you get access to other areas. You could think of it a bit like a speakeasy. In the old days, when Prohibition, when they were sort of hiding alcohol, you had to go to certain doors and knock on certain doors and say the right password and you'd be let in. Very similar with the dark web. So your common search engines don't index it, so it's really just a hidden sort of area of the internet.
So is the dark web illegal?
No, the dark web's not illegal, but a lot of the content on the dark web is potentially illegal. So what we do tend to find is a lot of criminal syndicates will create a marketplace where they could trade in drugs, weapons, information, even take assassination hits out on people, so you can find assassins and things like that. And obviously, those activities are illegal, and so they're kind of hidden on a marketplace that is very difficult to find or stumble across. You need to know somebody that can sort of point you in the right direction.
Wow, so sort of like online black market, so to speak.
Correct. That's right. Yep.
Now, Damien, something I wanted to ask you as well was, I'm not even sure if you can answer this or not, but do you have a high security clearance yourself?
No, I don't, not at this stage. There's different levels of security clearance that people can get. So you can get what's called a basic level security clearance. Then there's the negative vetting security clearance, and there's a couple of different stages there. And then there's positive vetting as well. So the basic one would basically give you access to some information. Negative vetting is where you would basically provide the government with a whole list of information in terms of where you've travelled, your jobs and things like that. And they'll check that out. Positive vetting is the more intensive one where they sort of look more deeper into your life, start to ask some really interesting questions and things like that. How you get a security clearance is often by looking for a role with government, for example, ASIO or Defence. And you can really only get a security clearance if you're the right kind of candidate, and it has to be linked to a piece of work or a project. So you couldn't just, for example, go and apply for a security clearance. You've actually got to have a reason to have the security clearance.
Now, let's get into scammers, Damien. So Australians lost over $10 million to scammers last year alone. And I feel like we've all been victims of at least one attempted scam. I know I have to multiple, and we were sort of discussing this before the show as well. So we have some very interesting audio to go through in terms of scams in process. And we're going to play them and then get you to sort of decipher for us what's happening in these audios. Beautiful. So our first little bit of audio is a scammer message. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So there's a couple of different ways that you can have a scam. So a very common one is if you're browsing the internet, suddenly you get an error message popping up on your screen. And you'll hear some audio and they'll pretend to either be Microsoft or they'll pretend to be Apple, saying that you've got some sort of problem and you need to call them on a 1300 number. So we can play that now if you like.
Beautiful. Go for it.
Error number 268D3. Critical alert from Microsoft. Your computer has alerted us that it is infected with a virus and spyware. This virus is sending your credit card details, Facebook login, and personal emails to hackers remotely. Please call us immediately at the toll-free number listed, so that our support engineers can walk you through the removal process over the phone. If you close this page before calling us, we will be forced to disable your computer to prevent further damage to our network.
Wow. So they want you to leave the page open there, definitely, don't they?
Correct, yeah. And they design it in a way where the JavaScript that they use to trick you into calling them basically makes it impossible for you to close that browser, and it has a space for a password and a username to be entered that obviously they can give you or put in as well. The really interesting thing about that is you would have heard the error number that was quoted at the start.
Yes.
That's an error number really for them because they can then determine what marketing campaign they're using, because they'll be attacking different people in different geographic regions, looking at people from different backgrounds and things like that. So it's a handy way for them to track which campaign is working and which one isn't. The website will look very much like a legitimate Microsoft website or an Apple website or whatever company they're pretending to be. And they'll even go as far to detect where you're connecting from, because when you connect to the internet, your browser discloses your location. So they can roughly know that you're either in Victoria or Sydney or Melbourne, for example. And then based on that information, the error message that you'll have on the screen will be a localized 1-800 number that you can call. So it's not even an international number that they give you. It's a very local specific to make it as easy as possible for you to call them.
Wow. So, yeah, everything looks super legit.
It does. And the great thing about the campaign that they run is they're effectively testing the water by seeing who's susceptible, because you're the one that's actually initiating the callback.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And you're taking the action that they want you to take. And we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. Let's have a listen to our second, and which is someone calling the scammers back. So you're taking the action that they want you to do.
Correct. So with this sort of audio clip, what you'll hear is the sound when you call them. So you'll get the whole typical, our customer service agents are busy, etc. And in this case, I've called them multiple times as well, so you can hear the different voices to give you an understanding that it's really a huge call centre behind the scenes. So it's a very sophisticated operation.
All representatives are currently assisting other customers.
Thank you for calling. How can I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Harry. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling. My name is James. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Alex. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Jack. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. This is Peter. How may I assist you?
So that gives you an idea that there's quite a large number of people that are involved in these. The call centres tend to be run from English-speaking countries, so think of countries like India or the Philippines as well. So they're sort of the great places that they run these scammer call centres.
You could even hear beeping in one of them in the background, like cars going past and other phones ringing.
Yes, yep, definitely.
Yeah, okay. So that's our second one. Let's have a little listen to our third one, and this is you, I believe, talking to a very helpful scammer.
Correct. So what I wanted to show in this one was the scammers are really they really give great customer service. And obviously they're doing it because it's their incentive in order to extract money out of you or to convince you to hand over credit card details that they'll then sell on. But it also gives you an example of they're very patient, they sound professional, very helpful. So you really need to be aware of when you're talking to people on the phone who they are, because they can sound very legitimate, but in fact they're actually a scammer that's calling you. So in this example, you hear a number of things where they're asking me for the error message number, and that's so they can look it up in their systems to know which campaign I'm part of. In this example, I gave them a fake one, so that kind of stumped them, which meant that they then wanted to connect to my machine to install the malware onto my machine. So I'll play that now.
Thank you for calling support. My name is Harry. How may I help you?
Hi, Sari. How you going?
I'm good, sir. And do you have any error number?
266B3.
266D3. And are you in front of the computer?
Yes.
May I know the brand name of your computer, sir?
It's just a generic PC.
There should be a name on the PC.
No, it's just like a black case. It's just a Windows PC.
And can I have your phone number? In case if we get disconnected, I can call you back.
Okay, that'd be great. 03
L3
5634
5634
2410.
All right. And since how long you're having this trouble on the computer?
From about yesterday.
And did you contact any technician about the problem?
No, first time.
And do you remember what you were doing on internet at that time when you received the problem first time?
Just clicking around on a couple websites.
If you'll allow me, I would like to connect your computer, then I will check what went wrong, and after that we will fix the problem as well.
Okay, yep, that'd be great.
So just look at your keyboard. Which key is in the bottom left corner?
It is the control key.
And what's next to the control key?
Just the Microsoft logo.
Just press and hold it down, the Microsoft logo. While holding it down, at the same time, press R. R for Robert. www.helpme.net. Just press OK. Yeah, you will see Establish Support Connection. And it says type your name. You need to type in your name, your first name only. And the support key number is 271-847-511. Then click on Continue. Then there is Continue. Click on Continue. Have you done it? Do you see any run option down at the bottom? Just click on Start Go to Assist. It says Start Go to Assist. It will connect to the computer screen to my screen so that I can check what was the issue there.
So you can see in that example, he wanted to know what type of PC I had to try and get more information out of me.
I love how the hacker is acting like he doesn't know what sort of PC he's got. It's a black one.
And then they wanted my phone number, obviously. So, they're calling from a country where the telephone lines occasionally will drop out. So he's got my number now so he can call me back.
Okay.
To continue the scam. Wanted to know information about how long I've had the issue for and if I've called before, because that's a key thing. They're looking for law enforcement or other people who might know about them that are trying to suss out who they are from calling them. So if you mention the word, for example, I think I've got some malware on my machine, they'll hang up on you immediately because they figure that you're somebody who is tech savvy and actually knows what's going on.
Okay.
And if you notice in the background as well, there'll be a lot of other calls that you can hear being received and other people also sort of being scammed at the same time. So it is quite a legitimate process, like quite a big process that they're running.
And do we know who a lot of these scammers are? Or obviously you're saying you do have an idea of where they sort of originate from and where these sort of big campaigns are run out of. What do we know about the scammers themselves?
Yep, so some of the scammers are, I guess, everyday people in obviously poorer countries who are told that they're going to be getting money from people who are wealthy and can afford it or are rich. And so they're quite happy to steal credit card details or get you to pay for services that you're never going to ever receive. They're the ones that kind of work for criminal syndicates. Then there's a different type of scammer who is a criminal syndicate organisation that's actually working on behalf of a state government. So a nation state, for example, might be North Korea. North Korea have sanctions in place, which means that it's very difficult for them as a country to raise revenue. So a great way to raise revenue is to actually set up and establish scamming operations, because then you can bring in money from overseas through those mechanisms.
That is unbelievable that there are countries that are working with the scammers to bring in revenue for the country.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
That is just that. I tell you what, if you learn something new every day, that is a piece of information that you just wouldn't imagine that would be happening.
It's very common these days, unfortunately, for governments to get involved in some quite serious hacking, and all nations do it. Australia has both a defensive and an offensive capability. Countries like Israel, Iran, China, most definitely, North Korea, the US as well. And they all do it for different reasons and different motivations. So sometimes they do it for political reasons, to flex a little bit of digital muscle, if you like, to sort of say, hey, the trade negotiation should go in our favour. In other instances, it's really a strategic one where they're looking to steal IP and information. China often gets accused of stealing intellectual property. It's not just China, it is a whole number of countries that do it, because it's far easier to steal intellectual property than it is to actually invest in developing it yourself.
And you were saying before as well, it's not so much, it is cyber warfare, but it's also information warfare that's going on. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so for a long time, people had thought about cyber warfare in terms of directly attacking another country's critical infrastructure systems or financial services area. That's starting to change and morph now, and what we're seeing is information manipulation warfare. And that's where, rather than attacking the critical infrastructure, you're actually using psychological mechanisms to sway democratic societies to vote one way or another on an issue. So if you look at the 2016 presidential elections in the US, Russia definitely interfered in that election. It used a lot of fake Twitter and Facebook accounts to sway the people from voting from Hillary Clinton to voting for President Trump. Similar sort of things happen across the globe. For example, it would be quite easy for a foreign country to interfere with the Australian election, and depending on which side they wanted in that was more favourable to them, they could be putting things out on social media to then convince the public to say, that person said something homophobic or that one said something racist, when they may not have done that at all, to try and shift votes in one direction.
Oh, wow. And we do have a big election sort of in the process at the moment. Do you think there are any countries in particular that might be sort of influencing voters?
Definitely there would be a number of countries. There's one that comes to mind very clearly, which is sort of an emerging dominant player in the market. But what you'll find is it's a lot of organisations and a lot of countries will have their agendas. So, typically organisations will have lobbyists. Countries will have their digital hackers, if you like, that are the equivalent of a lobbyist, but they're doing it, I guess, through nefarious and sort of illegal means, as opposed to sort of being upfront in terms of what they're looking for.
Wow, there's just so much going on behind the scenes that you just, you don't think about when you even thinking about things like elections, and it's actually blowing my mind. Damien, I want to talk about, before we go through your tips to avoid being conned, I want to talk about our personal susceptibility. So going back to scamming, you did write an article for The Conversation, which I really loved. It was so easy to follow. We can link to it in our show notes if any of our listeners want to sort of have a look at that and go over things again. It's a great article. And I want to read a quote from from that goes like this. Our evolutionary past also makes us susceptible to scams. Humans are curious social animals, which means we are more trusting than we should be. That's especially the case when we're dealing with people over the phone, email, or via SMS. Where we don't have normal body language cues we would subconsciously process when making decisions. And you also go on to say we are also susceptible to fear and other psychological tools scammers use to create a sense of urgency that tricks us into making irrational decisions and taking action. So, Damien, how does our evolutionary past make us susceptible to scams? And can you explain more about our susceptibility in general from a psychological point of view?
Definitely. So if you look at the way that humans have evolved, it's always that sort of fight or flight response. So, if you saw an animal that was threatening to you, you'd either fight it or you'd run. So if you carry that forward to the digital age, where we really haven't sort of evolved with technology is sort of racing ahead beyond our evolutionary sort of means, what we're finding is it's very easy to use fear to get people to become compliant and to follow directions and orders. And one way that scammers do that, for example, is they could ring you up or they could send you an email and it could look like it's from the Australian Tax Office or the Australian Federal Police. And what a lot of Australians fear is the tax office coming after them to say you've got, unpaid taxes that you owe. We're going to issue a warrant for your arrest. And so, that leads to whole fear around somebody's going to come, I've done something wrong, I need to fix this. And so people won't think about it rationally, and then they'll end up just falling for the scam by either paying the money that's being asked or by clicking on links or giving away information. Yeah, and it's very common also for organisations to get hacked using a similar mechanism. So if I wanted to break into an organisation, what I would do is have a look at maybe the local coffee shop that might be near that organisation and become familiar with the menu. And then I might ring somebody in that organisation and pretend to be somebody from the help desk, saying that I just wanted to confirm that, their accounts are all working. I would kind of build a relationship, mention the coffee shop and say, I'm really looking forward to having my break so I can go and get, such and such at the coffee shop. Because in that way you're kind of building up that rapport and you're kind of signalling to the person that you know the environment when in fact I might be across the other side of the world.
Yes.
So it's very easy to do that. If you're there physically, some people use their physical appearance as a way to break into an organisation as well, where they might compliment somebody and saying, you're looking fantastic today. I might use key things like, great to see you again. And so you're probably wondering, see you again, where have I seen you the first time? But because you're embarrassed and you don't want to admit that you can't remember me, you'll say, oh, great to see you again as well. And then we'll start to build a rapport and then I might ask you for something and then you're more willing to comply with that if you like.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing just to think about, in everyday interactions, what people's motives. And I guess, people sort of have this expectation that people are genuine. And if you're a genuine person, you do think that everyone else is going to be genuine and not have an ulterior motive like that as well. So, Damien, I want to go through your best tips for our listeners out there to avoid being conned.
So I think you have to start trusting people online less. Be very, very cautious when you receive an email from somebody that you don't know. Don't open up attachments from people specifically that you don't know. You also even need to be a little bit suspicious of receiving attachments from people you do know. And what I mean by that is often it's easy to attack somebody by taking over somebody else's email account. So if I take over your email account, I've obviously got access to now all of your contacts that you normally communicate with.
Yes.
So then I would then send a piece of malicious code in a photo or a Word document or a PDF and say there's this great thing that you need to have a look at And so instinctively, the first thing you'll do, you'll trust me because it's got my name there. You'll open up the document and then now your PC or your device, your Android device or even your Apple device is then infected. So you've got to be a little bit less trusting. If you don't need to open something, don't open it. It doesn't hurt to ring somebody and say, hey, just received this email. Was it an email from you? And then if it was an email from them, then, that might be okay. The other thing is when somebody calls you and pretends to be from the ATO or the Australian Federal Police or even from Telstra, don't trust them. The best thing to do would be to then find out what it is that they're calling you about and then go to the actual website of that organisation or that government agency and actually ring them back, quoting whatever details that they've provided you, because in that way, if it is legitimate, they'll have a record of a support ticket number within their system.
Like a reference number.
Yeah, correct. That's right.
Yep.
Because one of the other scams that we see quite commonly is people issuing bills that look like it's a Telstra bill or an Optus bill when in fact it's not really a Telstra bill or an Optus bill, saying that you need to pay this urgently or you're going to be fined, etc.
And you don't want to get the late fee, so,
Correct. And always be suspicious of anything which is you need to do it now, it's urgent, because that's a really easy cue to say, act now, it's urgent. If you don't do this, you're going to get arrested because often that's a warning sign because legitimate organisations wouldn't be doing that to you. They've got a proper dispute resolution process that they would flow through. They would never pressure you to do something urgently or threaten you with issuing warrants for your arrest and things like that.
That's such a good point because I never thought of that. If you're acting like, a proper professional business, you're not sort of like hassling people and saying, do it now, this is urgent. I mean, obviously with, late fees and stuff like that, you can say this bill's overdue, but there's ways they're going to say it.
Correct. And what is in their interest is often they'll, like if you've got difficulty paying a bill, their interest is, okay, how can we break the payment plan in a way that you can still pay the bill? Because they still want to provide that service. Whereas scammers will be, you need to pay this urgently, you need to pay this amount now, the bill has increased in volume, it's now no longer a $100 bill, it's now a $1,000 bill that you need to pay or you're going to go to jail.
Okay, wow.
There is another type of scam that's going on that will impact businesses quite a lot. And that's called an invoicing scam. And there have been quite a few businesses that have fallen for that. I know of a case of one business that transferred $3 million to a scammer's account, which is a significant amount of money. What they do is they'll either attack a supplier that business uses, and they'll use the email system from that supplier to say, here's some new banking details. You need to pay all our invoices into these new bank accounts. Or they'll forge an email and look like it's come from that supplier and say you need to pay your invoices into these accounts. And so if people receive something like that, the first thing they should do is ring that organisation using the details that they've got from when they first set up that relationship, not the details that are in the email, because that'll obviously be the scammers.
Yes.
Just to verify that, yes, have your banking details really changed or is this somebody pretending to be you?
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting that's going back to what we were saying with social media or receiving an email from a friend. It's a bit of a Trojan horse scenario. Correct. Whereas, even with businesses, it's coming from a trusted supplier. You might have been ordering things from and paying invoices to for years, you know.
Yep.
Wow, it's a very clever way, the old Trojan horse of doing things, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
And Damien, for our listeners out there who are parents, what are your best tips to keep kids' devices safe and kids safe online? So
the best tip would be to sit down and have a conversation with the kids and really sort of understand how are they using those devices. Don't be afraid to tell the kids that the parent needs to have access to that device as well to see what's going on. There is a darker side to using sort of digitally connected devices. A couple of those sort of darker sides are kids now are exposed to cyberbullying 24 hours a day, whereas, in the past before phones, it was kind of like you'd go to school and you'd get bullied, but then when you came home, you were in a kind of safe zone.
Yes.
That's completely changed now with digital technology. So kids can often feel that they're getting pressured and bullied. The other thing that's really important is you can have a scenario where a lot of adults are pretending to be kids and building a relationship with your child, where your child just thinks they've got an online friend, like a pen friend kind of thing, but a digital one, when in fact it might be a 40 or 50-year-old guy who is actually looking to exploit your child in some way. So it's very important to sort of be part of your child's digital environment, take an interest, understand where they're going, what are they accessing, who are they communicating with. Even if you have to say to them, look, I'd like you to show me, who you've been talking with and things like that. Build trust with your kids as well, because I think what a lot of parents don't do is take an interest, but then at the same time build trust with the kids that if they've got questions, it's okay to come and ask them. They're not going to get punished for saying, hey, I've been having this conversation with somebody and I don't know who they are. It's really sort of walking them through the steps of how to identify if that individual is somebody that they can trust.
So really giving them that knowledge and educating them on how to sort of decipher and look at things objectively.
Yeah, building life skills, I guess, from a digital perspective. In the old days, we had to get a pen license to, to go from grey lead to a pen. We don't really do that for digital technology.
I remember that.
So we don't really do that for digital technology.
Yeah,
and so
okay.
We don't really kind of teach young kids about the fact that, they might see somebody or communicate with them and that person is actually not that real person. Just the other day, I've got two older kids who are playing around with Snapchat, and there's some great filters where they can do some, fun things. And in Snapchat, there's a filter where you can, turn an adult into a baby and you can even change genders as well.
Yes.
So, scammers and sort of other people will use those things, but they'll use them against the kids. So
yes,
a child might think they're talking to a girl when in fact it's a middle-aged guy that they're talking to.
Wow, that's a whole nother kettle of fish, isn't it? Well, thank you for the parental advice there. It is a bit of a tricky subject, how to sort of monitor kids and devices, I guess. Damien, with all your research into cybersecurity and all your knowledge and looking ahead to the future, if you could change one thing about where it's going or what's happening now, what would that be?
So I think what would be great is if we had technology that was more secure. Unfortunately, a lot of the technology we use today is designed obviously by humans and has inherent flaws. There's a market competitiveness, which means that a lot of the software vendors or hardware manufacturers won't fully test things, and so they'll release things to market that have bugs or flaws in them that can be exploited by others. So it would be really to sort of have a system that could be more secure. Unfortunately, the underlying technology that we use can never be 100% secure, and it's just unfortunate that things are changing so rapidly that we'll never get to a point where you can be 100% safe and secure. And so it really relies on that human element. Probably another thing that I'd really like to change is a lot of companies and organisations spend a lot of money on cybersecurity awareness, so making people aware of all the cyber threats and things like that. But we need to go a step further and we need to think about behavioural change. So if you look at Slip, Slop, Slap campaign, that was a fantastic awareness and behavioural change campaign that helped people to realise that sun exposure could cause skin cancer, and so you'd take a protective measure. We don't have anything like that in the cyber sort of realm. So it would be great for government to take a lead and have a national campaign which was both an awareness and a behavioural change campaign to reduce the impact of cyber scammers and cyber threats for citizens and for businesses as well.
I love that. That's great. So if anyone's listening out there, that's a great idea for something that we could do now and implement now.
Correct,
for the future. Now, Damien, I loved reading this about you in your bio. One of your passions is establishing information technology community resource centres in impoverished and disadvantaged communities. Can you tell us a bit about these projects?
Yep, definitely. So I worked with some fantastic executives at Telstra and National Australia Bank. And what we did was we recycled a lot of the laptops from Telstra and National Australia Bank. We put software back onto them, installed sort of library information software, so they effectively had a complete library that didn't have to be internet connected. And then we basically went to a number of these sort of countries and worked with the locals to help set up these resource centres. So we did that in Cambodia, in Laos, Kenya and Uganda. And effectively we gave people in those local sort of impoverished communities a way to learn simple things like how to use a word processor, how to use Excel, finding out information using an online encyclopedia that was local on the device. And that changed a lot of their lives dramatically because we take it for granted. Knowing how to use Word in our lives is kind of quite a trivial thing. But for a lot of these individuals, it's a way for them to get a job in government, to become a transcriber, to work for a local business. So it was a real great way to improve literacy and also help people get access to digital technology that they wouldn't normally have access to.
Yeah, wow, that's unbelievable. And what was it like staying in these communities?
So we stayed in, like the one in Africa, we lived in a slum, and that was really, really incredible. It was very challenging. It was personally very taxing on you just to see the poverty around you, and sort of, people were extremely happy even though they were living in poverty because they were proud of the fact of what they did have. Which was, when you look at sort of, I guess, our society, we have so many material things and yet we're so unhappy. Here's an environment where people had so few things, material items, but they were very happy because of the community connectedness, I guess, within those slums.
Yes. And did you sort of come home feeling really grateful for what you have here?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
But you also come back a little bit jaded in the sense of people get upset over trivial things here compared to...
like road rage and stuff like
correct.
that. Yeah,
compared to life and death sort of struggle sort of within these sort of slums. And even sort of people taking, really simple things for granted, like being able to access the internet and communicate with somebody is completely foreign and alien to a lot of these sort of communities.
And where can our listeners go, or where can they sort of go to follow this or to look more into this project that you're running?
Yeah, so a lot of organisations like National Australia Bank and Telstra will run these programs. Rotary will also run these programs as well. So you really just need to find somebody within Rotary, for example, who's really got a commitment that can help bring these other organisations together and sort of recycle some of their electronic equipment to provide it as a learning centre in these impoverished areas. And the other probably important thing is about going in and doing things that the community wants rather than imposing something that we believe they need.
That's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's a beautiful project that you're able to sort of give back and use all your knowledge to be able to do something like that and even experience that, those sides to all of your studies in cybersecurity. This episode is presented by Deakin University. You can find all of the show notes and other great content related to this chat at disruptor.deakin.edu.au or find us on socials at Deakin Research. Now, Damien, we have got a fast few questions for you now. So strap in. We're going to pump these out. We want the quickest and the first answer that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Yep, go for it.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given on your path to success?
Network. So as in network with people, because often it's who you know, not necessarily what you know. So take all the opportunities to expand your network in business or with people and have a hunger for learning.
And is time really our most precious, unrenewable resource?
Time is most definitely the most precious, unrenewable resource.
If you could recommend one book to the younger generation to get them on the right path and thinking sort of the way that we want to go to ensure the Earth's future, what would it be? Just one book.
One book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which is by Yuri, and I can't remember Yuri's last name. Yuri Yuval, I think, is his last name. But 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
Amazing. I haven't read that one, but I'll put it on the list and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And Damien, lastly, if your life was a movie, what would it be called and who would star in it?
Oh, Sneakers. I really like that movie. It's a very old one, Robert Redford, and it's a movie about hacking and breaking into organisations to get to the truth.
Unreal. Well, thank you so much. This has been so eye-opening. I think my brain has just absolutely exploded through this conversation. It's been absolutely mesmerizing. I can see how it's going to directly relate to everybody that's listening. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like our listeners to know?
Probably from a career perspective, there's going to be a lot of career changes in the not too distant future with automation and artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity is a great field to get into. There are so many different career opportunities, from becoming a security analyst to becoming a forensics investigator, to becoming a governance manager, a security architect, security designer, security project manager. The list goes on. But there is so many things that people can get into. And you don't need to be a very technical person. So you could either be a programmer and you go down the sort of penetration testing path. You could be somebody that likes to do audits or has checklists. You might go down sort of the governance path. Or you might be a people person. So you might become a security manager and get the best out of your team from a leadership perspective. So it's a very diverse area. Definitely look into moving your career into that cyberspace.
There you go, guys. That's something to look in for the future as well. If we've got any youngsters listening out there who are interested in that, it's definitely going to be a huge part, if not one of the biggest parts of our future. Looking forward. Damien, it's been an absolute pleasure and incredible chat we've had today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Change One Thing podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to review, subscribe, and share with your friends.